It's great to be here with AWS and Microsoft and Google talking about security. This is such an important topic. Today, I'm going to focus on the partnership that Nasuni has with Google, and in particular, what we do with Google around ransomware recovery. But these are kind of native capabilities of Nasuni that apply regardless of the cloud that our customers are using. Very, very important area. So let me just start painting the landscape, which I think probably everyone who's been on this webinar this afternoon has already heard a couple of different times. We know ransomware is very prevalent. We know attacks are very frequent, and that's something key to my presentation today. Every 11 seconds. And as we heard earlier in the AWS presentation, it's not uncommon for attackers to revisit their victims. And just because you recover from one attack doesn't mean that next week you're not going to get another attack in some other part of your company, or worse, the same part again, and face all of that same recovery headache that you went through the first time. So that's a key piece of information I wanted to point out. We know this is a C-level issue. We know this is something that CEOs are asking, how quickly can we recover? It's sort of an accepted thing that ransomware is going to get through at some point. It's not a question of will it, but when. In many companies, though, many good products that have been on today's session are all about prevention and getting us to that 99.9% protection level. However, when an attack actually gets through, it's just as important that companies have good recovery capabilities in effect that, in a sense, can insulate them from the effects as well. So when we talk about ransomware, we talk about the three pillars. We talk about prevention, which has been a lot of our conversation so far today. Then we talk about, should an attack break through? Can you detect it in time? Can you scope it? Can you see where it is? Can you shut it down? So detection, second pillar, very, very important. The third pillar is where I'm going to focus, which is recovery. You've had an attack, it's breached a certain amount of your data. What can you do to get back up and running as quickly as possible? And I will share with you a data point from a recent survey of Nasuni customers that a third of them have been attacked so far. Fingers crossed, none of them have had to pay ransomware. So looking at that field a little bit more narrowly, or a little bit more granularity, in a more granular way, there's plenty of wonderful, very sophisticated products in the defense area, in the detection area, and also in the recovery area. And typically, the companies that deal with backup are considered part of the recovery strategy for ransomware, which is fine. However, being recognized as not sufficient for ransomware specifically. It's one thing to make a copy of your data and store it somewhere offsite safely when you need to restore it at a later date. Great. It's another thing to have a huge amount of your data suddenly compromised and need it back up and running in a very short period of time. Typical backup and recovery solutions are not designed to do that. They're designed to protect your data and make sure you have a good copy somewhere, but getting you back up and running quickly is not necessarily what they're strong in. So Nasuni, like I said, very glad to be here as a partner of Google. Together, our product in Google Cloud represents a great way to modernize file storage. This is a piece of your overall architecture. It's not the whole piece by any means in terms of storage, but file storage is a huge amount of customer data. It's spread out over a very large footprint. We typically find that customers have over 80% of their file data, if you will, stored in file servers. And so together, Nasuni and Google work to modernize that whole piece of your infrastructure and to help mitigate ransomware. Google is a cloud storage platform with incredible performance and incredible reach. It's a global partner of ours, just like Amazon and AWS. And what we see in their particular cloud network is, of course, speed. and tremendous reach and a lot of customer confidence, if you will, in their network based on, of course, using the search capability. So we're very glad to have now a full integration with Google as our partner. Okay, so let's get to the piece of the picture that we really focus on. 80% of company data is out there on file servers. It's pictures, it's PDFs, it's Word docs, it's design files, it's videos. It's an enormous amount of data. It's typically very distributed. It's typically in multiple locations. And the cost of managing that particular part of the infrastructure has gone up. Not so much because the cost of a particular terabyte per data storage has gone up. That's actually been going down pretty precipitously over the last couple of years. But all of the other infrastructure around it, disaster recovery, the networking capability required to share files, the backup capability, all of the synchronization capability to allow people to be using the same version of the file, and in particular, the management overhead. So companies today typically present this level of complexity the minute we go in to talk to them. They have 20, 30 offices, each have a different file storage server that was bought maybe at a different time from a different vendor with a different management system. They have a different backup solution, they have a different DR solution. So on top of that, imagine if you throw in a ransomware attack, what happens? Well, think about it. You're throwing chaos on top of complexity, and you have a really bad situation. You have a situation where you might have different protocols for recovering files depending on different backup solutions. You don't know how quickly you can restore your data in any one particular location. And worst of all, especially for today's IT senior managers, you can't go to your CEO and say, yes, I'm going to be back up by a certain amount of time. And that's really key in driving the decision, do we pay or don't we pay? Because if it's going to be a day of lost productivity, that's one thing. If it's going to be 3 days of lost productivity, that's another. If it's going to be a week, that's a whole different problem. So the time to recover is a growing piece of the equation around whether you pay or don't pay. And with this kind of complexity in place, it's very hard for IT managers to know how quickly they can recover. The other key piece of this picture is the recovery point. So at each location, you might have a backup running every half hour, every day, every week, every 2 weeks, whatever, full backup. You might have snapshots that allow you to do a full backup out 30 or 60 days. But you get this variation across all your different locations. And again, you don't know how much of a complete backup picture you have and how far back in time it goes, which is called the recovery point objective. Can you get your data back from a week ago? Can you get it back from 2 weeks ago? Can you get it back from 5 minutes ago? Obviously, if you're going to use a backup that was made 2 days ago or 3 days ago, you're losing a whole bunch of data that may or may not be compromised by the ransomware attack, just to get back to one good copy and restore it. And that's a loss of productivity that companies feel very acutely, particularly if they're in design businesses or code generating businesses where they've got folks working on intellectual property and creating materials and storing them in files, up to the minute. You lose a day or two of a developer's time, it's highly impactful on your productivity and your bottom line. And the same with an architect or an engineer, any person working on sort of intellectual property. So ransomware, like I said, is chaos on top of complexity. And what becomes very important to environments that have been penetrated by an attack is how quickly can they recover. So with that in mind, I want to step back for a second and tell you a little bit about how Nasuni and Google work together, the architecture. Nasuni is an object storage-backed cloud-native file system. And we function just like a file system on your local file server. We serve files to your end users at LAN speed through edge appliance that's typically caches enough files so that folks locally don't see any impact to performance, and we overcome cloud latency with that. But the big engine is in the cloud. The big engine is in Google Cloud, where the cloud file system itself is extremely scalable and extremely powerful. And what we do in Nasuni, which is really truly unique, is we do what's called continuous versioning. We take a snapshot every 1 to 5 to 10 minutes of customer files and put them in the cloud in an immutable format, period, forever. And we can keep an infinite number of these snapshots. We have a customer now with over 1 million snapshots of their data, going back in time as long as customers want to do that. So there's no snapshot limitation. There's no
Pearson's from. Hold on.
Sorry.
I'll keep going. Sorry.
Ronnie,
Yeah, sorry. I should have been on mute. My bad.
No worries. I'm glad it wasn't for me. The infinite snapshots is truly powerful when it comes to ransomware. This is not something you're going to get out of a typical NAS solution. It's very expensive to do. Lots and lots of snapshots, say more than 200 or 300 snapshots, you get into a lot of cost and complexity. But with Nasuni, it's infinite, and each one is stored as an object in Google Cloud, and each one is immutable. Now, on top of that, we have the file system itself. We have the ability to do disaster recovery. We have some other capabilities such as cloud orchestration and single console management. The cloud orchestration handles synchronization of files across different sites. The console management lets you manage all these sites from one location, as well as your capacity and your performance. But in the context of today's security webinar, I want to talk specifically about how all this impacts ransomware. Oops. I moved the slide. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay. So the challenge is fast recovery and the fast return to productivity and a known recovery time. And with Nasuni's Rapid Ransomware Recovery, you can achieve RPOs of as recent as 1 minute. Typically, it's 5 to 10. If you have very hot files that you're using a lot, you can set the RPO to 1 minute. The RTO is what's really impressive. The RTO is seconds. And this is where I invite all of you to come to the Nasuni website next week. We're going to be posting a demo of file recovery demonstration. It's an actual demonstration where we restored 1 million files in 36 seconds. Okay, so the ability to not only go back to a good, clean copy of the file is timed to something that's very recent, so there's very little loss of productivity, but the ability to restore that file to a usable end-user productive version is a matter of seconds. And that's because we essentially have this giant index in the sky that pulls up the files, but it serves them up at the same time. There's no movement of data from one place to another. There's no restoring data to a file server. There's no loading of tapes back up onto a disk. There's absolutely no movement of data. We're simply going back to the most recent untouched version right prior to when an attack occurred, and then restoring that set of files. It also enables you to be very precise. It enables you to identify, working with your IT directors, where was the attack. You need to scope out where it occurred and just restore those files. You don't need to restore an entire volume of files or an entire department's files just because one particular area of the company was impacted. And of course, that has implications for maintaining productivity as well. What we are so excited about with our partnership with Google is that all this is in the cloud. Google has one of the least expensive cost per terabyte in the cloud today, and all of our cloud partners do a lot to basically reduce the cost of traditional NAS storage by up to 30–50% with Google. our customers can save up to 70%. There's just a tremendous amount of savings by taking all that complexity that I talked about, moving it into the cloud, putting it into one central management system. And now, one of the features we've had for a long time is really coming to the fore in the marketplace, which is this ability to restore files so quickly with our continuous versioning. So a lot of cost reduction, but also a lot of protection and mitigation in the event of an actual attack. So how does this compare, with other solutions? Well, as we've got sort of represented on this graph, we're talking about millions of files that can be restored in minutes with Nasuni. Traditional backup, we all know, can take days, sometimes weeks, from tape or even worm disks. Cloud backup, of course, does a lot to speed up recovery, but there's still that need to rehydrate the server and put the files onto a production system and get them in, accessible by end users. With Nasuni, there's no delay like that. So Nasuni can make that recovery time extremely short and surgical. Just a couple of quotes from our customers. We surveyed them about 6 weeks ago, and like I said, a third of them had an attack out of the survey answering set, and none of them had to pay. And like I said, once they were able to scope out where the damage was, they were able to very quickly restore and get back to productivity. So this is sort of just a key approach. It's one approach. We recognize we're part of a whole set of tactics that we want our customers using to prevent ransomware, to detect ransomware, but then to recover. With a solution like this in place, at least as far as your file servers are concerned, if you're attacked, you can recover back to a good set of files and almost continue business as usual within a few minutes. And that's really the great thing, is you don't have to recognize the attackers, you don't have to pay, you don't have to go through a lot of disruption, at least as far as your files are concerned. There's a lot of other infrastructure we've heard all throughout today that's impacted by ransomware. It's horrible. It's attacking databases, it's revealing data, it's sharing data. It's many dimensions to ransomware, and I'm not trying to overstate what we do. What we do is one piece of this, but if you're concerned about the data that's on your file servers, this is a great solution, and this is a great partnership to look at in terms of recovery capabilities. So Ron, I'm going to finish up probably a little bit early and invite folks to visit our website, and we've got some great stuff on ransomware there and on our partnerships, and in particular our partnership with Google. And Excellent. Let me just stop here and see if there are any questions I can answer.
Let me look at them. I think everyone's soaking all the content. The thing I like to comment on, which is why Nasuni is such a powerful platform, is that everyone's storage is changing. It's becoming increasingly cloud-oriented. But there's so many different components of first-tier storage, backup, archiving. It's great to have not only the GCP and other platforms that I know Nasuni works with, but in this case, with regard to GCP, they've got almost the raw engine providing very cost-effective storage. I know one of the good things about GCP storage is every bit of data is encrypted at rest, in motion, and in use. And so, again, I don't know directly how the other cloud providers do, but Google has a very strong emphasis on encrypting data, which provides protection. But I also know they've got various tools to ensure that encryption and de-encryption doesn't affect the performance of your applications that use that data. And again, we encourage everyone to speak with experts like Ann and her team at Nasuni, because you're going to be getting away from, again, racking and stacking servers, plugging in storage, and all of that is going to the cloud, and the role becomes less of plugging in devices and more in architecting your storage. And the good thing is, when you work with partners like Nasuni and others, the thing that I've always found in 20 years that people know they have to do is backup test and go on over the weekend as if they're a flood and rebuild everything from scratch. And everyone hates doing it. And you hear these horror stories when companies didn't do it. They got burnt, and given what's going on with all the weather anomalies. I think the good thing that Nasuni and GCP, and along with their other partners, can provide is confidence and comfort that your backups will work and that you really don't need to do that complete weekend drudgery of checking everything out. It just works. I don't know if you want to comment on that, Ann, before we turn it over to Andy.
I think that's a really good point, Ron. It's a set it and forget it system. There is no scheduling backups. There's no checking to make sure the tape got changed. There's total peace of mind with the Google Nasuni solution. You set it, and that's it. And it happens automatically every 5 minutes. And backup is no longer it's not an expense, but it's not a management concern, and you don't have to worry about human error entering into the picture. That's
got it. And again, storage is not monolithic. There's primary storage, there's backup, there's tiered storage, there's archive storage, there's tape storage that you may need to keep for 20 years because of some regulatory requirements. Again, encourage you to follow up with Ann and her colleagues so you can architect your storage correctly.